And if not, then that's okay because you're young and it's summer, and you guys can sleep when you're older. But I highly advise you sleeping. It's good for the soul, for the mind, for everything. So, a couple announcements before we get into class tonight. If you have not yet, sign up for Mission More. That is July 7th through 11th. We're going to be doing a mission campaign here in Moore. We're going to be doing service projects, activities, outreach efforts, and we're also going to be having a surprise fun activity at the end of the week. So you're going to want to show up. You're going to want to participate in that. I've sent the link out multiple times to the group me, but if you don't know how to access it, just get with me after class and I can point you in the right direction. But the 7th through the 11th of July, we're going to be doing Mission More. Last year we went to South Dakota. This year we're doing everything that we did there, here in Moore. So it's going to be awesome. Tell your parents about it, ask them about it. We're going to be working a lot in conjunction with the congregation, so be sure for that. Other than that, we have Young Men's Day on Sunday. So most of all the guys in here have told me that they want to do something. So I have you guys down, and we had some practice tonight for those who wanted to do that. So looking forward to that. I bet you can't guess who our interviewees are tonight for class. Any guesses? Evan, do you know? Who is it?
Wess and Tammy.
Oh, yes, we have Wess. Way to go. No surprise. We have Mr. Wess and Miss Tammy Hackworth. We're thankful to have them here tonight to talk to us about their faith journey, about their life, about raising a faithful family, all that good stuff. I'm excited for their advice that they have to offer, their insights, their personal stories to share. You guys should know Wess and Tammy. They're very active in the congregation here. Wess is one of our elders, appreciative that he's such an amazing shepherd, that he cares for the flock here. Miss Tammy is very involved with the littles. So maybe you had her as a teacher in Time Travelers or Little Lambs or something like that. So I'm thankful for the service that they render to the kingdom here at Central. So before we get into some of the questions, I want to ask, just tell us a little bit about yourselves. Maybe a little bit more than just my name is Wes and my name is Tammy. But tell us a little bit about you, where you grew up, how you guys met, when you got married, things like that, the children that you have, the grandchildren that you have. So just a little short bio before we get into some questions.
Well, we've been going to Central here since February of 2000. Yeah, February 2000. And a few years after that, I started serving as a deacon. We raised all of our kids here, Kelsey and Logan and Michaela. Michaela still lives with us. And we've been involved with family circles. Back when we did family circles, we were family circle leaders, men's breakfast, teaching, various classes, various age groups, and different things like that. I was raised in southeast Oklahoma. Born in Tulsa, lived there until I was about 5 or 6 years old. Moved to southeast Oklahoma, a little town called Red Oak, which is between Wilburton and Podo, if you know where those places are at. Tammy lived there about all her life till we moved to Washington State after we got married. But I knew Tammy. We lived out in the country. Tammy lived in town, and just a couple of blocks west of the school. And they went to church in town, and they went to church at some other congregations. And we had a congregation out in the country, and that's what we attended when we left. Kelsey is married and to Chris Kidwell, and Chris is a minister at Paul's Valley. It's the 34th different work he's had since he got out of college. He worked with a congregation in Tennessee while he was in college, and then he was over at Hera in Bridge Creek, and now he's down at Paul's Valley, and they're doing real good down there, and they're real pleased to be there, and the congregation's pleased to have them. They have 3 children. Shepherd, Shiloh, and Lydia. And Logan is a youth minister. Him and his wife, Kelly, live in Smyrna, Tennessee. And they have a daughter that will be 1 year old next month named Hattie. And we get to go get her this weekend for 3 or 4 days. So, I don't know if I covered everything or not.
Anything you want to add, Miss Tammy?
No, not really, other than he worked for the Department of Labor under Mine Safety and Health. That's what took us from Oklahoma when Logan was 4 months old. And it took us to Seattle, Washington, and then to Rolla, Missouri, and then to Norman, and then eventually to Moore. We had placed membership here and was traveling back and forth from almost Noble. And then we bought a house. We moved up here so we could be closer to the congregation where we were serving. I worked in the school system for 14 years. And
I don't work
I mean,
anymore.
he,
February was
he's
my last day of
retired
work.
now. And all of our children met at Free Hardeman. That's where they met their spouses and where they got their degrees. And other than that, we're just trying to learn to live the retired life.
Yeah, lots of big changes, but that's great that you guys have
We're excited for it.
Michaela still, and you have your grandbabies, some that are
Michaela has
close.
special needs, so she'll always be at home with us. And so,
Yep, that's wonderful. Thankful for you guys. So the first question that I want to begin with is a question I've been asking everyone because I think it's the most important question you could ask someone, and it's the most important story that I think anybody could tell about their life. And that is, how did you become a Christian? How and when did you put on Christ, and how did you become a Christian?
Well, I lived out in the country. Like I said, we had a country congregation, and it was a small congregation. And it was an old schoolhouse that my dad actually attended a little bit when he was a kid before they consolidated and went in town. But it was an old one-room schoolhouse, and the church had a perpetual lease there. So we would attend there Sunday morning, and then we would go out and have a joint service in town 9 miles away in town of Red Oak with the church that was there. And we would go out there on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. Anyway, they had a gospel meeting out there, and a gentleman named Harold Dame was preaching, I think, down in Poto. His daughter is Barbara Anderson, and I didn't know Barbara. They knew me because they would come down to visit some. Anyway, Harold was holding a gospel meeting, and one of the older gentlemen lived about a mile from my house, wasn't a member of the church, and he responded was going to get baptized. And we was going to drive up to Wilburton because that's where the closest baptistry was. And on the way up there, I actually rode with Tammy's parents, and all of our family rode together. They had a big station wagon, and I decided I wanted to be baptized. I was young. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, but I'd been raised in the church all my life. And that's how I became a Christian. And when we got up there, I talked to my dad, and I said, I want to be baptized. And so that's how I was baptized, this gospel meeting.
well, unlike Wes, my family didn't go back generationally in the church. My dad studied and found the Lord's church when he was a teenager, right out of high school, and so our church family life, as far as the Church of Christ, started with my dad. And so I was raised in the church, but we didn't have the extended family in the church with us like Wes did. But when I was 14 years old, 14, maybe 15, just barely turned 15, I guess, I was baptized by my dad when I decided it was time for me to be forgiven of my sins. So.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. Next question I want to ask is, we've been asking this question of a lot of our interviewees because if you speak to people in the world, sometimes they have a bad taste in their mouth when it comes to religion, when it comes to organized religion, because one of the greatest blessings of the church is the people, but also on the other side of that coin, one of the most difficult parts of the church is the people that you deal with, that you sometimes are at odds with. But I want to ask this question on a very positive note. What do you love most about the church? I think it's great to talk about the good parts of God's body, of Christ's body that he purchased with his blood, God's kingdom that he has given us. So what do you love most about the church?
I believe what I love the most about the church is the connection that it gives us all over the world. with us moving from southeastern Oklahoma to Seattle, Washington, not having any family around, the family that we raised our children with in the beginning, for the first 3.5 years of Logan's life anyway, um, was the church family that we found there in Washington State. And they became family to us. My grandkids called them um, Grandma Claire and Papa Dick is what we called them. That was what their grandkids called them. And they basically just adopted our family. They helped us through surgeries when we didn't have family to stay with our children, and Wes needed to be the hospital, and taking care of our kids when our children had to have surgery done. So without the church family, I don't know how people survive in the world. I really don't. And not only that, but it connects us through people. I don't know that we don't go anywhere anymore that we don't know somebody who knows somebody that we know from somewhere. It's just really weird how it all connects together. And another thing I love about it is the power of the prayer that you get through having so many people you can connect to. When you send out a prayer request to your friends in the Lord's church, you're not just getting your immediate family and your close friends close by, but you're getting people all over the world, even in Brazil nowadays, and our missionaries and across the United States who will take the time to pray for you and your loved ones. And I just think, I mean, that gives me chills every time I think about how many people respond to those requests nowadays, that it connects us in ways you don't even imagine.
Mm. That's wonderful. And you, Wes?
Well, I think it's I was raised in the church, and my mom and taught class probably till they moved up here. And my dad was active, but my dad wasn't one to get up and teach class and stuff like that. Like I said, it's a small congregation, and he grew. And he grew mainly because I got a little stubborn, because I didn't want to do everything. And that sounds selfish, but when you teach, the Lord's Supper, song leading, and stuff like that, those are all great things. But I wanted to push my dad, and my dad wasn't a great song leader, but he would lead singing, and he would teach class, and he would do the Lord's table, and he done so many other things. But probably because, I would fuss a little bit, because I would do them, he started doing some of those things. So that was a great thing. And my granddad and grandmother were real faithful in the church. My granddad was a good song leader and a great teacher. And so we had some background there. But like Tammy said, when we moved off and moved to Seattle area, we didn't know where we was going. We didn't have a GPS. We had a road map. We never went out there and looked for a home.
Before cell phones.
And we rented an apartment, stayed in a motel for a few days, rented an apartment. Then we went looking for a church. And I'd been going to church other than one little time I was in Tulsa when I was a little kid. I'd been going to church out there in that country church all my life. And the first Sunday we went to visit one of the congregations, I told them, I said, listen, we're going to go in here and see what this is like. But if we go in there and it's not the church, and they happen to be playing music or something like that, we ain't waiting till the end of services. We'll be leaving. And we didn't have that. And we developed some good relationships out there. And then when we moved to Missouri, we had good relationships in there. There was 2 or 3 congregations right around there that we could have attended. Willie Franklin was one of them. And we didn't attend where Willie Franklin was at. That church had split. One of them was a little bit more liberal than the other one, I guess, if you'll use today's terms, or some terms they're used today. So we attended there till I got a transfer to Oklahoma. We was trying to get back closer to family. And before we came here, and kind of getting a roundabout way with the family part, we went down to Noble, And Noble was a congregation about the same size as what we had left in Washington State and in Missouri, a little over 100 people. And the lessons were scriptural, but the guy didn't really inspire me. They were kind of monotone lessons, so I was going to have a hard time staying awake, to be honest with you. So we went and visited some at Norman, and bigger congregation, but they wasn't as friendly. And we came to Central. We came to a youth rally, which we used to have every year here, and this group was interactive. I remember Tom Graham and Jim Fortune, others, reaching out to us and visiting with us, inviting us to fellowships. They were welcoming, and nothing against West Side, but they really didn't do that. And so we got here, and we've been here ever since. So I like the family aspect of it. I played basketball with the youth for years, and men's breakfast and all different kinds of camp. This was the first year I didn't stay out of camp, and I've done that for 20 some odd years, and I loved it, and I still love it, but it's just not. I just think geared towards staying out there now. Nothing against you guys, but I've had to transition.
Too old for staying up that way.
I had to transition a little bit, but
Yeah.
I like the family aspect of it, and Tammy talked a little bit about that. When I worked for the government, I worked for them for 30 years. 15 of those years, I was gone almost every Wednesday. I worked, and I was gone almost every week. So I'd attend in Ada, I would attend in Veneta, Tulsa, different congregations. So I met a lot of people, and it is a family. And I run into people. If they don't know me, they knew my brother. My brother was a youth minister. He's an elder now in Fort Gibson. And we would talk about that, and it just becomes a big family. And that's the great thing about the church. It's a great thing even about camp. The relationships that you build can last a lifetime. And, I went down a couple of weeks ago, probably 3 weeks ago, and spent beginner camp with Shepherd Shiloh, and the lady walked up to me, and I knew her, but I didn't know her, didn't recognize her. And I went to camp with her at Burnt Cabin over 40 years ago. And she walked up and introduced herself, and she's Willie Franklin's, Willie's son was married to her daughter. And so we caught up a little bit out at this beginner camp. And she asked me about if I went to somebody's funeral. And he was from the same town my sister-in-law was from. And I said, no, I visited with him last year when I went to a funeral, and it seemed like I didn't know he passed away. But you build relationships and stuff like that, and you gain closeness and stuff like that. So I would encourage you guys to build relationships, because that's what the church is about. If you don't have a relationship with Jesus, you don't have a relationship with other members, then your life will not be fulfilling for you. And you'll need people to lean upon. You'll need people that will pray for you and help you. And you'll get hurt. And you'll hurt for families and things like that, but it's not a bad hurt, because that's the reason God calls us his sons and daughters, if you will. And that's the reason we're part of his kingdom, is because of the family aspect of it. That's what I like about the church. And
I think I would encourage you not to wait for people to include you or to ask you to do something, but to go and find a place that you can plug in, that you feel comfortable enough to say, hey, let me help you there. Because if you sit around and wait, you could be waiting the rest of your life for somebody to try to include you. Every time we went somewhere, it was hard. It was hard on me to go and make new friends, and not only make new friends with my age group, but then consider my kids and kids their age and everything. And so if I sat around and waited every time, then we would still be just sitting around waiting. And so I think you just gotta find a place and you gotta get busy in the church, and you gotta tell yourself, I'm going, and not make it be a last minute decision, but always plan. My kids knew every Wednesday night that we were gonna be at church, and my kids knew every Sunday morning we were going to church. And they knew if there was a Devo, they were going, unless they were sick at home. They didn't have options. That's how we raised our children to just get involved in the church. You know, Wes went to the men's breakfast, as he's said many times, and Logan just knew that he was gonna get up and go with Daddy to the men's breakfast, because we believe that you have to train your children up in the way that they'll go, and that's what helps them get rooted in their faith as well.
That's great. And sometimes you get to bring Shepherd and Shiloh too to the
Exactly.
men's
And it's not
breakfast.
always easy. I mean, having kids all the time isn't always easy, but if they see you serving and they see you working in the Lord's church, guess what they're going to grow up to think they're supposed to do.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Hopefully you guys were encouraged by that, because it's what we want for you guys, to fall in love with the church, to plug and play, to be a part of God's kingdom for the rest of your life. I'm going to skip over one question and go to a question that kind of relates to something you were talking about, Wes. You mentioned your job and how sometimes it caused you to be gone and it caused you to travel. So I want to ask the question, how did you balance raising a family and pursuing each other as a couple while you were gone, Wes, for your job, while you had to travel and while you were away? So what did that look like, and how did you guys, and I want to ask you too, Tammy, how did you raise a family of 3 kids by yourself while Wes was having to travel? So what did that look like, and how did you guys navigate that?
Well, it's tough. It was tough. It was real tough. We moved out to the Seattle area and lived in Kent, Washington, which is about 18 miles from Seattle or so, 15, something like that. But I worked there 4 days. And then I went to West Virginia for 3 weeks. So Tammy had to take on a lot of that stuff, you know, while I was gone. And it was tough on her because she had 3 kids. She didn't know anybody. And I was gone for 3 weeks when I came back, and then I was gone 4 weeks in May, 4 weeks in June, and 4 weeks in July, with just a week off in between. So 12 out of 15 weeks I was gone. And then when I got back, or even sometimes those weeks when I was back, I was out of town. So it created some problems for us, not insurmountable problems, but some different scenarios, because my life was not my work. I don't want to say it like that, but when I was out on the road, that's what I did. I worked. I went out to eat by myself. I stayed in a motel by myself. I watched what I wanted to watch on TV. You know, if it was sports or whatever. I went to bed, I got up, and I went to work. And on Thursdays, usually, I got to come home. And I usually didn't work very many Fridays. But that was a big adjustment, because when I got home, guess what? There was Tammy and 3 kids that was wanting my attention. And I wanted their attention too. But it's like going from 0 to 80 miles an hour. Here I've been by myself for 3 or 4 days, and now all of a sudden, I'm just getting bombarded. And Tammy wants to get away from the kids, and she wants to go out to eat. Well, I've been eating out all week. I want to eat at home. So it did create some logistical things like that were problems. And also it was tough because we got the routine. And it wasn't necessarily a great routine. I would call her every night, talk to her. And I'd talk to the kids some. But guess what? What have you been up to today?
He would ask the same questions in the same order every night, every time he called.
And if I didn't watch it, I was just going through the motions. And I'd ask
He
her,
didn't even listen to
what
me.
did we get the milk today? And I'd already asked her that, you know? And so it was tough. But, you know, I probably didn't pursue Tammy as much, you know. But one thing it did allow me to do is, when I got off on usually Thursdays, like I said, once I got my 40 hours in, I was off. She was working, so I would take her over to Los Vaqueros almost every week, or I'd meet her for lunch, and then I wasn't working, she was at work and the kids was in school, so I helped out around the house. You know, I do laundry, I do dishes, vacuum, and anything else to do, you know, while they were gone, so I did a lot of those things, so I probably spent more time doing that since they were gone. But also it gave her a break that she had to catch up on stuff, you know. I could catch up because I had the whole day. But, my job was tough because it was law enforcement. I was going out and doing inspections, and if people weren't doing the things they need to do, they got citations or tickets, if you want to call them that. And it was kind of adversarial in that respect. But my job was never more than my family was. It was because of my job that I was providing for my family. When I had the opportunity to get off the road, yes, I was making more money, but I wanted to be home. And so it's important when you look for your jobs and your careers and stuff. Somebody said if you love your job, you'll never work a single day in your life. I liked my job. I don't know that I loved it because it took me away from my family. It took me away from Central. Now, I attended other places, but I was gone almost every Wednesday, you know. And so that part was tough. And it was tough on Tammy because she had 3 kids she had to wrangle and take care of while I was out on the road. But when I had the opportunity to become a supervisor and cut my travel down like 90% or more, I jumped on it. And it was a whole different set of responsibilities, oversight of 5 or 6 people working for me, or 7. And but I got to sleep on the bed at night. I got to eat, and I got to start doing more things with the kids. Logan and Michaela were in high school. Kelsey was graduated or had just graduated. No, she graduated before I became a supervisor, so I missed a lot of other things that happened through the week. You know, I tried to go to some of the school programs and stuff like that, but it was tough balancing that, you know. But, the job was good in that it provided good benefits and good pay, good insurance and stuff for health and retirement and stuff like that. So that aspect of it was good. And it wasn't a bad job, but it also took me away from my family quite a bit. So when I had the chance to become a supervisor and spend more time at home, I jumped on that.
I agree, it was tough. My dad traveled a lot when we were growing up, and his job took him everywhere. And he was raised in that same type of family dynamic. So when we came, I have 2 siblings, and when my siblings and I were born, he wanted my mom to stay in one location and raise us in one school and not have to move from school to school with his job. And so my dad, like I said, was gone. The majority of my life growing up, he missed a lot of almost everything growing up. He was home for some holidays and missed a lot of them. But I swore that wasn't what I was going to do with my kids. And when I married Wess, that's not what he was doing. But when Logan was born, that's where God called us into that job. And he took me to Seattle fussing and kicking and screaming. I wasn't really wanting to go, but he kept saying it would be better for us. And it took 4 years for me to think that it was better for us. I mean, it's hard. Any relationship's hard. Just like with your parents, you don't always get along, right? There are days when you don't really like mom and dad very much. You don't like what they've told you to do, or what they're having you do, or you don't like school. You don't like, sometimes you don't like your friends. But it's the same way with a spouse. You love them. That's what God wants you to do. But I don't always like what Wess does or says some days. I just don't like him. Now, I love him. And that's where you got to figure it out. You got to love him enough to stick with it, warts and all, just like he has to love me enough to overlook what imperfections I have. So I think that what you have to do is you have to, for one, look for a mate that is going to help you get to heaven. I knew Wess Hackworth all my life. I didn't like him the majority of it. He is 5 years older than I am. He moved off. He came back to town, and he had grown up a lot in the few years he was away. And then we became friends, and we started overlooking each other's imperfections, I guess, and became friends. And then when the relationship that I was in ended, then he was there ready to start one, and I didn't even know he was interested. That's how oblivious I was. And so, anyway, it didn't take us long to figure it out. We dated for 3 months, and he asked me to marry him, and that was in March. We were married the first week, or the first 2 weeks of June, the 10th of June. So it didn't take us long to figure it out, but I knew Wess Hackworth could get me to heaven. The relationship that I was in before, that wasn't the case. And so I'm glad that God opened my eyes to the fact that the person my daddy had been telling me, hey, but what about Wess Hackworth? I'm like, no, not him, not him. And so, like I said, we fussed a lot growing up. We spent a lot of time. He had a brother with cancer who had to have a lot of treatments, and his mother did not drive. There were 4 children in his family and 3 in ours. And his dad had to work, and so when Dale had to have treatments, it was people in the community and people in the church family that took Judy plus her 4 children and whatever children was in that family, 75 miles plus wherever we were heading. It was 75 miles to Fort Smith, Arkansas, and even further if we had to go to Little Rock. But we spent a lot of time fighting in the car on road trips, and just like I would with my brother or my sister. And so, you know, like I said, God knew all along that he was the person to help get me on a path that would lead me to heaven someday. And you just have to love that person enough to stick with them, because if any time I could have left my husband, it would have been those first 4 years that he took me 2,500 miles away from my family and the only town that I had ever known, which was a population of about 700-800 people. I came from a small dot on the map to Seattle, Washington. I was a fish out of water. There were a lot of one-way streets. There were not cell phones, and I did not know north, south, east, or west. You tell me right or left, and I could find it, but I was lost, and he was gone all the time, and it was hard. It was very hard. But God saw us through. Our love saw us through, and just a couple weeks ago, we were headed to the hospital to see J.D. Kochner's daughter before surgery, and Shiloh and Lydia and Michaela were with us, and he and I were kind of fussing about the way to get to the hospital. And he was doing something on his tablet, and I was trying to keep from fussing with him, but he was not reading he was not very good at reading between the lines. And Shiloh in the back seat said, Mimi, are you and Pops acting like teenagers when you didn't like each other? And it really, really, really made me stop and think about how perceptive they are, because he's in the very back seat of our van and we're in the front seat trying to have a quiet conversation. But Shiloh picked up on every bit of it. And that's what he related to the story of us saying how we fussed with each other growing up like kids. And it made me laugh, but it really made me do some soul searching too about how we communicate with each other in front of others. So anyway, find somebody to get you to heaven, and that's the most important thing. And if you find somebody and that's both of your goals, then you can weather the storms and you can iron out the wrinkles of your relationship, and whatever happens, whether it's going in debt or, moving 2,500 miles away from family, or having, an unfortunate death in the family like his parents did. And, it's God. It's God and that relationship built on him that will get you through anything.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I see a lot of providence in your life from God, and I see a lot of wisdom in relying on him. And it's quite a testament that your children are faithful today. And that's wonderful because you don't really see that much with
Not always.
a dad who's on the road a lot. So I appreciate you guys and such an example that you set, and how you're continuing to set an example today for so many people in the church and your grandchildren. And my only question is, if Shiloh and Lydia were there, then where was Shepherd at? Is he on the roof or something?
He had a doctor's appointment
Okay.
the next day, and so he didn't get to spend the night.
I know Shepherd. He probably was on the roof.
But he had his day picked out.
Yeah.
Trust it, he wasn't going to miss out.
All right.
One
Well-
thing I would encourage you guys to do, and I know we gotta move on, but is you've gotta build your own faith. I had a good foundation with my mom and my dad and my grandparents, my other grandparents, the good people. They didn't go to church real regular. They didn't go to Church of Christ. You know, they were good people. But my dad's dead, my grandparents are dead, you know, my mom's got Alzheimer's, and life comes at you. And you guys know this, things change, but if you can build your faith, and it become your faith, not your parents' faith, there's nothing wrong building upon that, but it's gotta become yours, you know. Somebody said years ago here at this congregation, and they said, you probably heard it in other places, you know, that 50% or 60% of kids, once they get out of high school, they leave the church. I don't know what the statistic is. That's probably true. But I can tell you this. I'm not the wisest person. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Guys, people have made up their mind long before they graduate, lots of times where their faith's at. Doesn't mean that they're lost, but if you don't do the things you need to do today, and I'm not preaching to you, but if you build your faith now, it'll carry you forward. It'll carry you through the storms of life. It'll carry you through the tough times. It'll carry you when you've lived in the same 4-mile radius your entire life, when you go all the way to Seattle and you're out there by yourself. Because I'm not rich. I don't have a lot to show for my life, for working, for everything. I do all right, I guess. But I can tell you, God has always took care of me and my family. And no matter what's been thrown at me, whether you're having to go to hold your daughter in your arms, they have an MRI done to try to figure out what's going on with her mentally, when they put her to sleep, and you say, and I'd give anything if they put me in that tube, do this brain scan. I'd take her place in a heartbeat, you know. Life can throw things at you, but if you build your own faith, and you build relationship like I was talking about, God will see you through. And the tough times, the good times, He said, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. You know. But Joby, it can't be your mom and dad. That'll carry you so far, but it's got to be your faith. Same for all of you. So I just want to encourage you guys to think about that, because I'm not preaching to you, but like I said, family, relationships, church family, Christ being the foundation. That's what, you know, we sing that song, the wise man built his house upon the rock. Build your life on the Lord Jesus Christ. You can't go wrong.
Well, it kind of answers the question I was going to ask. When was the most difficult time in your life to remain faithful, and how did you push through? I think that's a great answer. If you wanted to share anything too,
I
Miss
think
Family.
the most difficult time in my life is when my dad was struggling back when I was in junior high with his faith. He was a welder by trade, and he worked for the union. And way back in the 80s and the 70s, when I was a child, union workers didn't always get the jobs. And so there was a time when financially he didn't know how he was going to keep the roof over our heads or food on our table. And I remember him in the backyard working the garden tiller, because we had a big garden every year in the backyard. And I could hear him screaming at God over the sound of the tiller in the house about how frustrated and upset he was, and how he felt like God was, not hearing his prayers. And I remember him going to an eldership in a town that we were attending, church, a bigger church than where we were raised in Red Oak. Um, and they, asking for prayers, not anything, but just for them to pray, and how they just he left there very discouraged by that eldership, and how Sunday morning he was not going to go to church. My mom took us to church because guess what? It was our first day of church camp that day. And so we were supposed to be going to camp. So that week while I was at camp, I was worried sick about my dad. And, my brother and I were at camp. My sister was too young to go, but about middle of the week, I broke down upset because, I just didn't know how things were going, and I was worried. And the preacher from one of the other congregations, about an hour away from where I lived, wanted to know what was wrong and if they could help. And I told him what was going on, and he said, "Can you come to the office at the campground that was at, the only place that there was phones?" And he said, "And call your mom and make sure she brings your daddy when they come pick you up from camp on Saturday. I'd like to talk with him." So I did, and my daddy came. And for like 6 hours, my dad and that preacher sat down and they talked. And he asked Daddy to bring his family to church the next Sunday in Albion. And that's where we went, and where we continued to go, and how I spent the majority of the rest of my life at home going to church there in Albion. But I just remember how scared I was, because the person who was our foundation and everything I was raised to know, and everything was crumbling, and I didn't know how it was going to be fixed or mended. But God put somebody in my life at the right time to help us patch that foundation before it really got wrecked. And so I think in my lifetime, that's probably been the hardest, most scary time for me. And it wasn't too long after that, then I was baptized. So, but
Probably the hardest thing for me, I've always went to church, been part of the church. We went out to Washington State, the church wasn't quite as strong. They didn't have as many fellowships. They didn't have fellowships at the building. They weren't an anti-church the way a lot of people classify them, but they didn't have fellowships at the church. We made real good friends. Like Tammy talked about, the elder and his wife that became grandparents, if you will, to our kids. Loved them, still love them. But they decided that they were going to have cottage classes. You guys probably heard of that, where people meet on Sunday nights in people's homes and stuff. But the problem is, they never went to people's homes, never set all up. So here we used to go to church 3 times a week, and now we're just going on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights. And it started to creep in that, even when we did start having church on Sunday nights again, it was hard to make ourselves out because we almost got acclimated to not going. So that was the struggle.
it's kind of like when COVID hit, you were used to staying home.
But God has saw us through.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, sorry we didn't open up the floor to have any kids' answers, but we're out of time. But hey, I want to encourage you guys to talk to Wess and Tammy. Ask them if you have any questions about anything. They are great. They have a wealth of wisdom. They have a wealth of insight. They love the church so much at Central. They do so much work here, so much good here. We're thankful for them. We're thankful that you get to serve as a shepherd and shepherd's wife. We know that you guys are wonderful spiritual leaders for us, and you care about us as the flock. I'm going to close this with a prayer, and then we'll head on out to devotional. But be sure to tell Wess and Tammy, thank you so much for coming in and sharing stories from their life and advice to you guys to hopefully internalize and think about, seriously think about, as you look towards being faithful for the rest of your lives. But let's close in prayer.
Let me say one thing
Yeah.
real quick. Thank you guys for having us. I want you guys to know this. I'm very sincere about this. We love you guys. We love you guys. We appreciate you guys. And may God continue to bless you, watch over you.
Thank you. Let's pray. God, we love you so much. We're thankful for this day you've given us. We're thankful for this hour that we've got to spend together to hear stories from Wess and Tammy in their life, and to have them share their faith with us and their journeys that they've been through and their peaks and valleys, dear God. We're thankful for the wisdom and the insights that they've shared with us about relying on you and turning towards you, dear God. May we all be encouraged by that. May we all look to you and trust in you for wherever we find ourselves in this life, wherever you take us, dear God. May we work in conjunction with you, dear God. And may we always, like Wess and Tammy, pour into the church to not just be someone who's a consumer, but someone who's also a server, to help others, to serve others, to be the hands and feet of Jesus, dear God. We're thankful so much for Central. We're thankful for the fact that we have faithful men and women to look up to and to learn from, dear God. We're thankful for Jesus most of all. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, guys. Let me know if you need
Thank you.
anything.